Today, we're asked to wage a new campaign against a new kind of enemy.
There are now more than 100 cases of measles in 14 states.
The crowd became more angered, even someone firing shots.
It is absolutely true that it was an attack on a peaceful meeting of debate.
Despised so much, in fact, they've threatened to cut out the tongues of anyone who uses it.
Our coalition is on the offensive. ISIL is on the defensive, and ISIL is going to lose.
The saying goes, if it bleeds, it leads, drawing viewers in by covering the stories they fear the most. With plane crashes, riots, Ebola, and now measles, it's hard not to think the world's falling apart.
If it bleeds, it leads is a mentality that the most graphic pictures might dominate the newscast.
Also called fear-based news. If it bleeds, it leads focuses on drawing eyeballs to TVs.
In one sense, it's more sexy, or it gets more attention if it bleeds more. And also that journalism in some ways is easier and cheaper to cover than the good in-depth news about what's going on in our government.
Really the most important story for most folks is a city council meeting. You know, the most, sorry, but man, it's the most boring, droll kind of, meeting that you'd want to go to. But those kind of decisions affect our taxes, affect, the ordinances that we have to live by. Those are in many ways more important to us on a daily basis than a plane going down in China.
But the headlines aren't always right, and the facts say otherwise.
A recent article by Harvard professors Steven Pinker and Andrew Mack said we're actually living in some of the most peaceful times. If you take a look at the data, homicide in the U.S. has been declining since the 1990s. Since 1993, sexual assault and rape against female partners has also dropped significantly. The same can be said for violence against children.
The article says newsreaders will always perceive that they live in dangerous times. Here's a graph of the homicide rates in the U.S. and England from 1967 to 2013. Trends show a big decline in the 1990s in America and no real significant increase nor decrease in England for nearly 50 years. Worldwide, the rate of death in genocides and mass killings has declined since the 90s, and today, world civilians are several thousand times less likely to be targeted than they were 70 years ago.
Yeah, I was looking at stats on violent crime. I think is down to the lowest levels since 1980 or since actually the 1970s. And so, yeah, that kind of surprises you because you think that the crime rate is high, but it's actually, one of its lowest rates in probably 30 or 40 years.
Constant coverage of public figures assaulting their wives and girlfriends, as well as episodes of college rapes, suggests a surge of violence against women. But heightened awareness as well as public shaming for violence toward women has shown positive progress.
These numbers represent a huge U.S. population, so what about us here in St. Joseph? In the first 2 months of the year, we saw 2 homicides in city limits, one just outside near Fawcett, Missouri. Also in Elmo, Missouri, a 9-month-old was accidentally shot and killed by his 5-year-old brother.
When you look at some of our trends lately or over the last couple of years in St. Joseph, you really have to keep things in perspective. If a crime spree occurs, and a crime spree can occur at any time, then that changes the whole perspective on it.
Despite this recent spike, crime in January 2015 was actually down from January of the year before.
But then when I looked at other crimes in January, it was close to a 16% decline from this last January compared to January a year ago.
Murders in St. Joe have stayed consistent despite a spike of 8 in 2010. And rapes in St. Joseph have stayed relatively low. The last 2 bars seem high, but that data is after the definition of rape changed in 2013, causing a slight skew in information. Altogether, there's no definitive data saying we are in more danger now than, say, 10 or more years ago.
So according to the numbers, we're safer, right? Devil's advocate would say, not so fast. According to media professor Jonathan Ash at Northwest Missouri State, we're not necessarily safer, it's that the enemy's changing.
I don't know that we're necessarily as safe as we think we are. We don't have traditional enemies.
We can't afford to play politics with our national security.
I think the dangers have changed. They've become less tangible. And 9/11 is a great example of we don't know when it's going to strike.
Do you think the world is a safer place?
I
think it's a more interesting place than the internet. Definitely a more interesting place.
I don't really think so, comparing, say, 20 years ago.
The more I know about what's going on in the world, the less safe I actually feel.
I think I definitely look out more for my wife, my child, than maybe if I was 30 years in the past.
Sure, if you take all the headlines, you bundle them up into one montage, it's easy to think the world's falling apart. But as former President Bill Clinton once said, follow the trend lines, not the headlines. In St. Joseph, Adam Waltz, Fox 26, KNPN.